I was a software development engineer at a payments platform used by small online retailers. My team owned the API merchants used to submit refunds. We were migrating customers from an older endpoint to a new version with stronger authentication and clearer error handling. One of our largest merchants processed about 12,000 refunds a month. 2 days after they migrated, their operations director contacted us because roughly 8% of refund requests were failing. Her team had to retry them manually, customers were waiting for money, and she wanted the migration reversed immediately. The interaction became difficult because our dashboard showed the new API was healthy, and I initially told her the failures appeared to come from malformed requests in their integration. That was technically true, but it was a poor response. She heard me blaming her team after we'd asked them to migrate. She challenged why the old endpoint accepted the same payloads and said she no longer trusted our readiness claims. My objective became restoring reliable refunds within 1 business day and rebuilding enough confidence that she could make an informed decision about whether to remain on the new API. I stopped trying to defend the platform and acknowledged the impact. I said that regardless of which component rejected the requests, we'd change the operating conditions, and I owned finding the gap. I asked her to show me 3 failed cases and explain what her agents were doing when they occurred. I also repeated back the consequences as I understood them. Agents were doing manual work, customers lacked reliable refund dates, and her support queue was growing. She corrected one detail about how retries were prioritized, which gave me a more accurate sequence to reproduce. That changed the conversation from an argument about fault to a shared examination of the customer journey. The examples contained an optional reference field with trailing spaces. Our old endpoint silently trimmed it. The new schema validator rejected it. Our documentation said the field was alphanumeric but didn't state that surrounding whitespace caused rejection. So their requests were technically invalid, but our migration guide had hidden a behavioral change that mattered in production. I considered asking the merchant to sanitize every request, adding a permanent exception to the validator, or making a temporary compatibility change while both sides corrected their systems. The first was fastest for us but left their customers exposed during deployment. A permanent exception weakened the contract for everyone. I recommended a 7-day compatibility rule that trimmed only this optional field, logged every use, and returned a warning header. In parallel, their team would remove the spaces and we would update the migration guide and contract tests. The operations director was skeptical because she didn't want another untested change. I shared the exact scope, tests, rollback trigger, and a sample showing that amount, currency, and customer identifiers remained untouched. I also offered a joint verification call rather than asking her to trust another status email. She agreed provided we reconciled every delayed refund. I implemented the narrow rule behind a merchant-specific flag, added tests for blank, spaced, and invalid references, and reviewed it with our security engineer. After deployment, I compared accepted requests with their retry file. We recovered 913 delayed refunds without creating a duplicate. I stayed on the call while her team submitted live samples, then sent a reconciliation report in plain language. Failure rate returned below 0.3% that afternoon. The merchant completed its client-side correction within 5 days, so I removed the flag on day 6. They remained on the new API, and support contacts about migration validation fell by about 30% after we updated the guide and added compatibility cases to our certification suite. The outcome was positive, but my opening response made the interaction harder than it needed to be. I treated API correctness as if it settled customer responsibility. It didn't, because we had failed to communicate a changed behavior. If I handled it again, I would begin with the customer's operational impact and reproduce their journey before discussing where the defect sits. That would have helped me uncover the documentation gap sooner and avoided spending the first part of the conversation defending a system that wasn't meeting the customer's reasonable expectation.